So we're going to change the dressing on this patient. And first, we've already washed our hands. We've identified the patient, made sure we have the correct patient. We've reviewed the doctor's order. The doctor's order will not say what type of dressing that we're going to use generally. Instead, what will happen is it'll just say change the dressing. We're going to assume that this is a complicated wound because it's a sterile dressing change. Most dressing changes in the hospital are not complicated, and we've already talked about that in class, but most of the time when we deal with a sterile dressing, it's a very complicated wound, has very specific directions on what we need to do. So the first thing that I want to do is remove the old dressing. So again, we're going to pretend this is a complicated wound. So I have the biohazard bag, and I need to open that, put my dressing in, and then I need some sterile gloves, or not sterile gloves, exam gloves. So I'm going to put on some exam gloves. If this is a complicated wound, the patient's probably had something for pain before I even started, 20 to 30 minutes before I started, because it probably does hurt if it's a complicated wound. So then I'm going to remove the old dressing. So I'm going to pull up some of the tape and put my finger along the skin edge so I don't pull the patient's skin, because if they're a geriatric patient, of course, you'll end up with a skin tear. So I'm going to carefully remove the old dressing. Now, if this is a complicated wound and it has a lot of drainage, and the drainage is a little odoriferous, smelly, or really just looks really bad, I might want to take this dressing off away from the patient's face so they can't see it. However, if they're going to be going home and changing that dressing themselves, assuming that they could reach this area, I might want to take the dressing off so that the patient can see that wound drainage and know what the wound looks like and know what kind of drainage is normal for them. So I'm going to assume that this patient is not going home for a while, and I'm going to remove this dressing. And if it's stuck a little bit, I can use a little bit of normal saline, drop a little bit of sterile normal saline on that wound to get it unstuck so I don't pull on the wound. So I've gotten rid of the old dressing, and now I'm going to get rid of my gloves. And then I would put the side rail up and go wash my hands. Now, if I had a confused patient, while I was washing my hands, they're likely to put their hands in that wound. I might need another person here to remind the patient not to put their hands in that wound. So I've washed my hands, so now I'm ready to do a sterile dressing change. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my dressing pack here. Okay, open up. Well, and it didn't open very nicely. Now I'm going to get rid of this because I don't need that. I already have one. First thing I'm going to find when I open this up is little forceps. I don't need these little forceps, so I'm going to throw them away. So I'm going to move my box over, and I'm going to pick up the sterile field. I'm going to pick up the sterile field on the very edge of it and pull it up away from me. The blue side goes down. I'm going to hold on to the very edge because I have an inch of sterile edge there, and see if I can get this thing to open up. There we go. Okay, now all the contents that are in this box are sterile. So now I'm going to open up my gloves, put my sterile gloves on. Of course, with sterile gloves, I'm going to put my dominant hand on first. grab a hold of the cuff, put the glove on. The next one I scoop. Then I'm going to get the contents out of this sterile box. I have tape, 4x4s, ABD, scissors, and that's all I'm going to need. So that's all I'm going to get out of this box. I replace what is on, or the dressing I replace is going to be based upon what I took off of the patient. So I took off 3 4x4s. So that's what I'm going to put back on the patient, is 3 4x4s. And I went ahead and opened them up. And then I'm going to open up the betadine. And I cut it open. You can tear it, but I cut it open because it's so messy, it stains things, and I don't want to get sprayed with the betadine. So I cut it open. And now I'm going to clean the wound with the betadine. Of course, I've made sure that the patient's not allergic to iodine or betadine before I do this. So I'm going to go down the middle of that incision, and you can see I use the flat side of that to clean the wound. So I'm getting the most bang for my buck, right? And then I'm going to clean the other side of that wound the same way. And then my side of the wound with the betadine. And then I throw the whole thing away, being careful not to touch the red biohazard bag. Then I'm going to put the 4x4s on, and I do this without touching the patient or the patient's skin or the sheets or anything like that. And then I'm going to put the ABD on. I just rest it on top. And then, now that I have a dressing on, I can go ahead and tape this dressing in place. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to window frame it. In other words, I'm going to put a piece of tape all the way around this dressing, and that way it'll stay put. Now, if I had a patient that their skin tore very easily, I might not do that. I might just put 2 pieces of tape on, one at the top and one at the bottom. But this patient doesn't have, they're pretty young, they don't really have skin tear issues. So I'm going to put the dressing on so that it'll stay on if the patient gets up and sits in the chair or goes for a walk down the hall. Okay, and that's it. Now once I'm finished with all of this, I have to dispose of the sharps. And the sharps are the scissors, and they'll go in the sharps container, along with there's a safety pin in this box, and that will also go in the sharps container. That's it.